All right. Good evening, everybody. Good to have you back. Now, good to have you back here on a Wednesday night. Now, I'm just going to say off the bat, I know I can see with the audio right now that whereas the volume is decent, I'm having a little bit of a panning issue, and for some reason, I am higher in one ear than I am on the other ear. Why is that, you might ask? I don't know. Because this is quite frankly, we don't tend to seek out the weird or the odd. The odd just happens to us. So if this was at the other studio with the old equipment, I would know how to adjust the panning to make sure that this levels out a little bit. But after I get off the air tonight, hope it's not too much of an auditory inconvenience to you all. I'll do a little bit of investigating, and hopefully I'll get to the bottom of what this is now. But good thing is that for Studio A update, everything that I need for the upgrade on Friday afternoon into Friday night is here. All the physical stuff, the hardware is good. So it'll be hardware and hopefully firmware and drivers, all that stuff on Friday night, and then Saturday morning and throughout the entire morning into the early afternoon. I hope to be spending time over there building up my broadcast profiles and scenes and everything else, so that by Tuesday the 6th we'll be back doing shows at Studio A. The majority of the shows at Studio A, because now I just like doing some stuff home, and I got both locations. And some things are just more convenient to do here, regardless of the weather. So that's nice. And I just wanted to let you guys know. That's it. January 31st, 2024. Greetings to all of you on QuiteFrankly.tv, Rumble, YouTube, Twitch, DLive, Rockfin, and beyond. We have to welcome back. I'm so honored to welcome back author Donald Jeffries tonight, who just published a new book on the JFK assassination, which focuses on the invaluable investigative work of Jim Garrison, among others. And tonight we're going to talk to him 60 years later. There's that 100-year cough again. With whatever time we have left in the second half, we got to do listen, there is it's a never-ending deluge of crazy headlines. That's what I put in the bio for tonight's show, and it is true. It's crazy. It really is. And we definitely got to talk about James O'Keefe. Last night, James O'Keefe put out a little bit of a I'm not suicidal message. She said, whatever's coming out tomorrow, I just want to let you know that I don't fear death and this and that. I said, it's going to be one of those days. Well, we could talk about a little bit what happened there. They got a top White House cybersecurity official talking. Of course, it's another gay guy who is answering a Grindr app. You know, I made the joke on Twitter, and it's not that much of a joke. It's for real. When you think about all of the people over the course of the last couple of decades that we went and waterboarded in the Middle East, all right? Waterboard, torturing, keeping people up all night listening to the best of Aqua. It is just incredible that all we could have done, all we had to do was send James O'Keefe out to the Middle East with a plate of linguine and a bottle of rosé, and he would have gotten anything you wanted out of anybody. Now, the other thing there, too, is another big thing that we see here. You know, back in the day, most of the guys are gay. I'll just come out and say that. It's very obvious. Most of the people who are catfished, I don't know, are gay. And maybe the DOJ, the DOD, the DHS, HHS, all these. I think if they're going to start with they're going to keep up with the diversity quotas and all that stuff, at least hire some non-horny gay guys. Because I'll tell you, man, they talk. You put a little bit of linguine in front of them, and they just spill the beans. It's just you gotta rethink your inks here. So we'll talk about that in the second half when we have a little bit of time to read what was released by James O'Keefe and then watch a little bit of the video. That'll be after Don Jeffries is on with us, and it's going to be. I think it's going to be good. I don't see why it wouldn't be. You know what I mean? Talking about JFK, it's always a good thing. Don and I have a mutual friend in John Barber, who I knew was going to be in this book. The book is called, let me get it up on screen for you. Where the hell are you, book? Here it is. 1 second. The book is called Pipe the Bimbo in Red, Dean Andrews, Jim Garrison, and the Conspiracy to Kill JFK by Donald Jeffries and William Matson Law. So that is going to be in the the focus of the first half of the show, and perhaps bleeding a little bit into the second half after intermission. I really hope that you guys are around for that. There was another big announcement today. I'm sure everybody's very, very relieved about this. We're making big, big strides in being able to save the planet for future generations. That is right. The so-called Biden White House has appointed John Podesta to replace outgoing U.S. Special Climate Envoy John Kerry. That's right. That's right. Demon Hands has been put in charge of the climate. What are you going to do? Really, what the hell is anybody going to do anymore? It makes no sense. But the good thing is that today, from John Podesta's new office, he issued his first edict to fix the climate this afternoon, and here it is.
But I have discovered the secret, Henry. Hot ice. That's right, hot ice. I heat up the ice cubes. It's the best of both worlds.
Yeah, well, the only thing I will say is watch out, Henry. Just watch out. Get out as fast as you can. Because old Demon Hands, he's hungry. All right, so that's what we have on that end. We'll talk about James O'Keefe in the second half of the show after we're done with Don. And there's another MK Ultra job cutting off his father's head and talking about the militias and taking out feds and all that stuff in Pennsylvania. That was pretty disturbing to see pop up last night. I did not watch the video. I will not be watching the video. Thank you very much. In fact, I'll tell you, I was out with a friend today for a quick lunch, and it just reminded me once again how if it weren't for doing what I do for work, 95% of my activity on the internet would be gone. Some of you, I'm telling you, that those of you out there who choose to inundate yourself with this stuff, I don't know why you do it. I think I might have an unknown, nameless, faceless Tumblr account still, because there's some really good history blogs there. There's some really good stuff that goes on there. You could just be, a faceless person that nobody knows, and certainly none of your family and friends will be there. Other than that, I'll tell you, it's nuts. And you tell me this as we go on a little bit of a break here, and then welcome Don Jeffries. Road deaths, people dying on the road, senseless beatings, shootings, suicides. The other thing that is popping up a lot on YouTube and elsewhere is people with terminal cancer diagnoses who are giving goodbye videos and shit like that. Is anybody else getting bombarded with this stuff? I am cleaning out, because it just gets thrown into your suggested, gets put into the reels, into the shorts and all that stuff, and I am clearing out watch histories constantly to prevent the algorithm from boosting this kind of feedback loop and creating and delivering even more of this shit. It is just, you can't tell me that there's not some kind of a devious reason behind it, that they're not trying to just bring us all down a couple of degrees, because, man, the highest of highs laughing at some of the best of humanity that you can see in these shorts, and then all of a sudden it's just pure nightmare fuel, and that's it. Good night. Good night. Now you can go to bed. Yeah, right. Anyway, that's just something I wanted to get off my chest. I put it out there last night too, because it's crazy. You can't get away from it. Anywho, that's it. Thank you so much to my sponsors, BlueMonsterPrep.com, and to everybody else on the affiliates page. Well, I'll have an announcement for you about all the new, quite frankly, mugs. Don Jeffries just got into the waiting room, so let's kick this one off. We will be right back.
Behold, Simi, life, real life, a thing that we have been denied for far too long. you let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's ride!
Okay. Welcome. Welcome. It is 7:10, 7:11, something like that, 7:12. Depending on how many clocks you have and to which planet they are synced. I don't know. You know my clock woes. Anyway, welcome to the show. It is Wednesday night. Everything is going smoothly so far, aside from a little bit of a glitch in the sound, but I think we'll be able to survive. I would like to just take a little bit of time to let everybody know, especially on Rumble. If you have not been getting Rumble rants read, it's because I can't see them. I don't know what the hell's going on over there. In fact, even regular chats do not pop up for me when I go to check for them after the fact. So just let you know, if you have missed out, if I have missed any of your Rumble rants, please email me and let me know, what you have said in the past, so I can at least address some of the things you tried to bring up to me. I'm not ignoring you, and you can send in those chats, the gold pills, quite frankly, superchat.com, all those, and we will get those read onto the record in the second half. All right, ladies and gentlemen. So here's what we got going on right now. We are going to be welcoming a friend of ours back to the show. He's a very good friend. He's been on the show. I feel like Don has been on the show dozens of times now. We've discussed unsolved mysteries in American history, strange Hollywood deaths, the intelligence ties to counterculture movements in this country, Fortean topics like UFOs, and of course, the Kennedys. Okay, MK Ultra, Bobby Kennedy, a fascinating dive into John Jr.'s suspicious demise, and tonight we'll be touching on the big man himself, JFK, 60 years after the fact, and Don Jeffries has added himself to the pantheon of authors who have compiled essential information on the public murder and subsequent cover-up of an American president. So, Don, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Frank, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
It's always a pleasure to have you. So, first, tell us a little bit about your... I see that this is the first time that you've shared the marquee with somebody on a published work of yours that that you author. Tell us a little bit about William Madsen Law.
Yeah, William's great, a great friend of mine, a great researcher, very under-recognized. He's written several books himself on the JFK. He's pretty much specialized in the JFK assassination, although he's done some work with Marilyn Monroe and RFK too. He hasn't had that published yet, but he's probably, I think, the foremost expert on the autopsy evidence. He's a real expert on the medical evidence. When he heard I had, and my friend was Dean Andrews III, my brother's friend, more likely, I had this, there are some coincidences in life, and probably 20 some years ago, my brother met Dean Andrews III, and he told me, about, met him in a group, and he said, this guy he can't be Dean Andrews Jr.'s son. But he was, he came over to my house, brought his scrapbook. His father was, the beatnik guy that was played by John Candy and Oliver Stone's JFK. And his father ran the New Orleans Jazz Festival. So we had a scrapbook of him with all the jazz people and stuff, and musicians. And I said, wow, this is really great. So he became a friend of the family. He was at a lot of family gatherings, and he was my brother's best friend. So, because he was a friend of mine, I wasn't sure there was a book there, but William said, no, this is a book. He's got to tell a story. So, he interviewed him on the record, and we included that in the book. And we just decided to make it about, the New Orleans aspect, which is has gotten play in some books. And, of course, Oliver Stone goes into it a lot in JFK. But I wanted to differentiate here between what what we call this is the ground level plot. So we analyzed that. We didn't analyze the real conspirators here, but these were all people, first and foremost, Lee Harvey Oswald, who were being manipulated. Oswald being manipulated to be the patsy, and the rest of them were probably being manipulated as well. And as I believe, Frank, that like Jim Garrison, that Lee Harvey Oswald was on assignment at the time of the JFK assassination, was told to infiltrate a group that was plotting to kill the president. And that group would have included all those people in New Orleans, all the anti-Castro Cubans, David Ferry, Guy Bannister, Jack Martin, all the people that you saw in Oliver Stone's JFK. But we wanted to take it deeper. And I think people look at that and see the connections. Clay Shaw, I believe Clay Shaw, who was pretty much the only one left alive for Jim Garrison to bring to trial. I think that we demonstrated in the book that he had some incredibly powerful connections to Operation Paperclip in World War II. So I think he was the conduit between the ground level plot and the real conspirators who were probably in the Pentagon and the CIA and everywhere else in the deep.
When you say you go deep, it's true. And this is the fastest I've read a book. And because of how fast I had to read it, there's probably a lot of minute details that I have missed out on that I have to go back and read a little bit more leisurely. But let's start from the beginning for people who don't know. Jim Garrison and Dean Andrews. Our mutual friend John Barber, he's been screaming it for years. Jim Garrison solved the case. Yeah. And to see that quote was in the beginning of the book. For those of you, for those who don't know, could you please give a little bit of a background of Jim Garrison, especially, and how he came to pick up the mantle of this investigation?
Well, Garrison was the DA of New Orleans, and he, on the day of the assassination, or within the day of the assassination, he actually questioned David Ferry. And a lot of this is in Oliver Stone's JFK, so you can see that. And very, very memorably told him that he took this very strange, very long road trip to Houston to go ice skating. It made the story made no sense. As Kevin Costner said, they have simplified the story hard to believe, and he certainly was. But he subsequently dropped it, and he didn't think much more about it until he, as you see in the movie, he was talking to Senator Russell Long, who of course is the son of my all-time hero Huey Long, the United States Senator, and he's the one that got his attention and said, "Hey, that Warren Commission, that's a bunch of BS." And so it aroused his interest because he remembered David Ferry. And then when he started reading the testimony in the 26 hearings of exhibits, like a lot of it later, he was really interested in the testimony of Dean Andrews Jr., who was a friend of his. Dean III, told me many times, Jim Garrison would call their house and say, "Hey, hello, young Dean." And, they used to go to the New Orleans Athletic Club together. So they were friends. And that's reflected in the conversation that's between John Candy and Kevin Costner. That's where we got the title from the book, where he just typed the memo in red, check out the chick in red. And people have asked about that title, but we thought it reflected his unique beatnik lingo. So we also included his Warren Commission testimony in the book because I call it the Beatles of the Warren Commission testimony, because most of the testimony in those 26 volumes is just falsely reading. It's boring, it's meaningless, it's just padding the record. Dean Andrews Jr.'s testimony is great, really interesting. It's riveting, even without the beatnik language, which makes it even more interesting. But after he saw his friend, who he had known Dean for a long time, and he said, "Well, this guy's talking about." He got a call because again he wasn't stupid in the case, and Dean Andrews Jr. got a call. He was in the hospital on the day of the assassination. He gets a call later on November 22nd, 1963, from a Clay Bertrand who he knew, and what most of us believe now was Clay Shaw, but who asked him to represent Lee Harvey Oswald. Now Dean had represented Oswald as his attorney during that summer. And I personally I think that Dean Andrews Jr. was being manipulated like everyone else. And he was maneuvered into that position of helping Oswald, supposedly with his dishonorable discharge and things to do with his wife's immigration status. And that's where Dean was also sucked in there with what he called the gay caballeros and all the gay Latino kids. Again, I believe that the whole Cuban connection, I'm alone amongst the researchers. Nobody else thinks this. I believe that it was a smoke screen. They were only in that New Orleans level, and they only interacted with what I call the ground level conspirators. And I think, Dean was sucked into that, and that's probably why they picked him to call him. I really can only speculate, and that's I think Dean struggled with the rest of his life to figure out why they called him as well, because they had to know they were going to kill Oswald 2 days later. So I really don't know what that call meant, but at any rate, he was sucked in, and that destroyed their life. And the book also talks about the background, especially talking to Dean the Third about what these kind of things do to people, to families, and the families destroy them. And I met Dean's widow, who's still alive, like 96 or something like that. She came to my house for dinner many years ago, and first time she talked to a researcher, and I tried to make her understand, no, your husband wasn't just crazy. He knew what he was talking about, because behind the scenes, and that's what the book reflects, is young Dean the Third's revelation that his father, although he committed perjury and participated in the attack on Jim Garrison and lied about everything, but he was doing it to save his own neck, because he knew all the people that were being killed. And he said one time, I like to breathe, with these great big statements. And but behind the scenes, he was incredibly paranoid. He thought they were going to get him. He was locking his house when his youngest son, who just, Dean's younger brother, just died tragically a couple months ago after a lifelong battle with drug abuse. And frankly, I think it was because of what they went through. And Dean the Third himself has told me, hey man, I could have led a good life. They were leading a good life. He was in law school, and this disrupted everything. So it's a story also just kind of to some degree of how families get uprooted over this, and we see this in other issues. Oh, what it does to them. But so hopefully, people are interested. So much has been written about the Kennedy assassination, but I think we took a deep dive into an element of it that hasn't been explored enough.
It was definitely a lot of new concepts for me, which also made me go and reconsider things I already knew, things I've read in the past, and that I had open-ended questions on. And before we get a little bit more into Oswald, as you document in the book, events like this, whether it be JFK, 9/11, anything else, it's not only just about, in this case, taking out one person, but it becomes a colossal marker, of societal shifts, where life never truly is the same for anyone afterwards. And there are usually, in those cases, a number of people who go missing or have strange things happen to them to shore up an official story and to leave only a few meaningful detractors behind. And usually those meaningful detractors that are left behind are just subjected to a lifelong of slander and libel, to be punching bags so that everybody else can see what happens to you. And of course, so people can always ask that question, well, if he's really got the goods, why is he still alive? Although a couple of people are usually left alive. So can you talk about some of the people who have disappeared in bringing the JFK investigation to new levels over the decades?
Well, I mean, there's the JFK body count it makes the Clinton body count amateurish. We know how big the Clinton body count is, but although the Clinton body count continues to grow, but the JFK count, they pretty much wiped out everybody that they needed to. But I think after the assassination, with something like 18 witnesses who were really integral to some aspect of the assassination died unnaturally in the first 3 years after the assassination. At the time, I think an actuary gave it, the odds, although later they tried to revise that and say it couldn't have been that, but it was certainly high. It probably had to be at least 1 billion to 1 or something like that. And again, if you read these deaths, Ken Jones was a writer that who wrote the Forgive My Grief series, that he was the first one to focus on mystery deaths. And in fact, he should probably be considered the father of body counts. He was a little, editor of a little paper out there in Midlothian here in Texas, who was a journalist who was trying to actually do a good job. But when Garrison came, Garrison's witnesses not only being killed, you have people, of course, David Ferry, who was probably his most important witness. I think Ferry would have been central to his case more than Clay Shaw. And you can see in the movie Joe Pesci, playing Ferry, he was really that paranoid. He knew he was going to be killed. And he ends up dying, with supposedly of natural causes or whatever they claimed it was. And he had 2 typewritten suicide notes. I guess he knew he was going to die of natural causes. I mean, so this is the same night that he died in Florida, Eladio Del Valle, again, one of the many Cuban characters that are, that are integral to this, what this ground level conspiracy was, all being manipulated. He was found with a hatchet through his head. Same night. So, that's a double exclamation point. And at the same time, we have other, lesser witnesses that had already died. Guy Bannister was killed before Garrison could question him. He died of a heart attack, supposedly. And you had, you had people that are, and we talk about the other deaths in the book, but you also have Garrison was being stymied not only by the media, but incredibly negative. I mean, think what some of the coverage that Trump has been. I mean, Garrison was really subjected that the entire mainstream media was against him with one attack piece after another, and he didn't have a social media or anything to fight back on. So he was the victim of really tremendously bad press coverage.
Well done. But, around halfway through the book, you talk about a woman that you were able to interview personally, and you conducted this interview just last summer. Her name was Gwen Siegel, and you said that I think her mother said that straight up, everyone who knew Lee Harvey Oswald died, and that's why they didn't want to talk to anybody.
Well, that's probably the most one of the biggest exclusives of the book is I was able to, and Frank, from doing this for so many years, and I have a couple of researchers that help me out a lot, Peter C. Kosh and Chris Graves, that really find information, get contact information on a lot of these people. And whether it's 9/11, Oklahoma City, or certainly JFK Jr., any of this stuff. And when you try to call them, 99% of the time, the phone numbers you get have been disconnected. I have to think that's way above the national average, the numbers that are listed on 401. So I understand it's difficult, but this phone number was for Ed Vogel, who was Lee Harvey Oswald's best friend in high school. And he was also in the Civil Air Patrol with him earlier. And so he knew of David Ferry and everything. And I knew he had died suspiciously at like age 32. Right before the House Select Committee on Assassination, or shortly before that. And he died at the Alvin Ochsner Clinic in Louisiana. The Ochsner Clinic, and we go into that a little bit too, where I don't think people have examined that enough. Ochsner was a close ally of Glacier. The Ochsner Clinic was known primarily servicing third world dictators. When they got sick, they flew to the Ochsner Clinic. But this guy, Ed Vogel, Lee Harvey Oswald's best friend in high school, wandered in there, and he died under very strange circumstances. And until I contacted his family, we didn't know what his family thought. I don't want to give any spoilers, but yeah, you're right. I talked to his originally Gwen Siegel. That was his niece, I believe, and then she hooked me up with his sister, Sweetie Pie and Cookie. Those are their real names.
Wow.
But, so I talked a lot to Sweetie Pie, and they're just they're Cracker Jacks, man. They were very bold, and I said, most people are terrified to speak out. But you're right. Everybody knew Lee Harvey Oswald died, and so his family obviously thinks he was murdered, and so nobody has even talked to these people or thought about that before. But that's what we like to do. Like to go deeper into it and show how deep the tentacles are and how much they affect. Because I'm not sure what he could have, what a lot of these witnesses could have done. I don't know, but obviously someone thought they were in the way, and so you had the people getting killed like that, and being no longer there for Garrison to call. You had witnesses that were. You had Julianne Mercer, and again, they show her in Oliver Stone's JFK. He does a good job of portraying a lot of this, where she's scared, she's frightened, and she's the one that saw Jack Ruby walking up the grassy knoll on the morning of the assassination. And so it's pretty much bombshell testimony. And she's the one who also said that she was shown a picture of Jack Ruby before he killed Oswald as one of the suspects. So these are the kind of witnesses. And we tried to track down Julianne Mercer. I think she's still alive. Possible. You can't. She's gone into deep hiding. But Garrison's movie reflects that. She was terrified to come testify. Other witnesses were hiding in states. And again, this is unprecedented. We've seen it kind of recently where DeSantis actually threatened to protect Trump in Florida when of course, Trump, as usual, didn't stay there and went to New York to face the music when he could have stayed protected by DeSantis. But back then, it was an automatic when a DA, especially if something like the investigation of the murder of the president of the United States, it's automatic for a governor of another state to extradite a witness that they need. But not in this case. You had Governor Ronald Reagan of California who refused to extradite witnesses. And you had Governor John Connally, of all people, who were shot in the assassination of Governor of Texas, who refused to extradite witnesses, along with the governor of Ohio and other places. And
wow.
We go into that book, and these were important witnesses. So Garrison was left with not much of a case, unfortunately. But he wanted to try to do something, and I think he still did a good job of proving Clay Shaw's involvement in some way. But the jury was, the public relations campaign against Garrison worked, and after that, he kind of, and then I talked in there about Clay Shaw's strange death itself. where Clay Shaw died, again, in strange circumstances. Right as Jim Garrison was on the eve of being reelected. And what happened is when his body was found after a neighbor reported that an ambulance drove up to his house and took a body out of the ambulance and put it inside. That neighbor was never located. I don't think that was the story. And however it worked, right after that, that was right before the election, Garrison's numbers plummeted and he ended up being defeated after all the negative news, the rehash of, his harassment of poor, kindly philanthropist Clay Shaw broke the news, and you can imagine what happened there. So, but Garrison, and he was pretty much out of the public eye until our friend John Barber became the first person to interview him.
Oh, there's so many parts in that book about John and Garrison that are incredible to pick up. And like I said, you don't want to give away too much because I want people to go and read the book. Yeah. But I would love for you to talk about something else that I just did not know was such a hugely odd string of coincidences, I guess you'd say, that would pop up, and that is the NASA angle. Oswald working at this coffee company for a few months in 1963. And Garrison uncovers that almost everyone who worked with Oswald at this Riley Coffee Company went on to work for NASA. What? So that is some weird stuff. Is that the extent of the NASA appearances in this timeline of events, or even if it is, it's weird?
Yeah, no, it is, and that was one of Garrison's investigation had so many elements to it. He did a lot of great work. His investigators were really good, and much better, obviously, than the Warren Commission and the FBI, who didn't try to investigate anything. They were there to cover it up. But Garrison, he found when he went looking at the because he was trying to track where Oswald had worked, because he had a series of dead end jobs where he didn't tend to stay there very long. One of them was a Riley Coffee Company, and we go to the book about the Riley involved here. Had some strange connections himself, and when he was working at Riley Coffee Company, that's also where he was seen supposedly taking a bag or something from what looked like from an agent. A couple, I think, so that was an important place that he worked. But when they went to check the employment out, they found that almost no one was left, even though it had only been like 4 years, I guess. And but that was strange enough. But the fact that they'd all gone to the same place, and I wrote about this a little bit. I touched on it in Hidden History, first nonfiction book, but we go deeper into it here. And the connections are just everywhere. And two people with dubious connections to David Ferry and the Civil Air Patrol. These guys end up being roommates living next door on Dauphine Street to Clay Shaw. I mean, the connections are everywhere, and it's for people to think that these guys didn't know each other is ridiculous. And so, and you have to figure, okay, we don't know, and that's why I think what differs the way I look at things, and William agrees with me, I think, but is that I think these are ground level conspirators. So I don't think Clay Shaw was the mastermind of the assassination. And certainly all the rest of these guys, especially the anti-Castro Cubans, because I've said many times before, I think these Cubans were a smokescreen. They're everywhere in New Orleans. They're all around Oswald. And these people, these people, but I think they were there to divert people the wrong way. I think it would be kind of like people looking at Saudi Arabia for 9/11, like that. I think it's, or in other elements, maybe the mafia for JFK. But because look what happened. If the goal of killing Kennedy was to topple Castro in another Bay of Pigs, or to take all relations away with Cuba, then what happened after the assassination? Cuba died as an American political issue. There was no second attempt to kill. The CIA stopped trying to kill Castro. LBJ never tried to do anything. Nixon never, and Castro outlived them all. So if that was their goal, they had to feel like it was a horrible failure. And so, I think researchers make a mistake looking at that. I think the evidence is clear that all these Cuban characters, and a lot of them were centered around Dean Andrews Jr. in the office where he was their attorney, doing whatever he was doing for him. And what was he doing for them? I don't know. Were they all told to? That's just my speculation, but they may have all been manipulated as Oswald was. Oswald was manipulated. And in this book, we talk about Ann Ditchler, who William became friends with. And Ann Ditchler is a forgotten researcher who was part of Garrison's staff for a while, and she talks about the fascinating investigation they were doing in New Orleans, where they were looking at the Oswald impersonation sightings in New Orleans. A lot of people know about the ones that Oliver Stone portrayed a couple of them in JFK, where he was, on the firing range and shooting at the wrong target, and going and driving a car when he supposedly couldn't drive a car at great amounts of speed, and then telling the guy, giving him his name, of course, then I guess I'll have to go back to the Soviet Union where they pay workers enough to buy a car. He was dropping that Oswald name everywhere, but it clearly wasn't Oswald. Well, the same thing was happening in New Orleans. So he gets drunk in a bar and throws up and makes a big scene and drops that Oswald name everywhere else. But Ann Disler was the one that was really working on that. And we have a nice a transcript of a talk she gave at a conference a while back, but she's been forgotten. So I think we came up with a lot of stuff I think that other researchers haven't looked at as closely as they should have.
Yeah, that in particular was very odd with 1961, because it's one thing to say, in my rudimentary understanding of what's going on there, we know in the hours leading up to his death, one of the biggest things he could tell the press was, "I'm a patsy." So you wonder, okay, well, how is he being done? How is this being set up? And the fact that we, in this book that you put in there, that back as far back as 1961, that there are reports of people who were impersonating an Oswald. Yes. And I said, were they really laying the groundwork that far in? I mean, that's only a year into Kennedy's term.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, there you have people. John Armstrong has a whole Harvey and Lee theory, and I don't subscribe to all of that. I know John. I've had him on my show, and he spent a lot of his own money, and some of his research is great. He's the one that proved that Lee Harvey Oswald, the young Lee Harvey Oswald, was registered in 2 different schools at the same time, and I think 8th or 9th grade in Texas and New York, I think. So impossible, obviously, and he's the one that found all these recognitions. And he talked to Ed Vogel or Ed Vogel's family and people like that. But I guess he actually didn't talk to the sisters or anything. But he mentions Vogel and people like that, and because there's so much reason to believe that you have the memo from J. Edgar Hoover from 1960, I believe, where he talks about we're concerned that someone is impersonating Oswald. What? In 1960? I mean, why did this Marine hit? So that's when you have people like John Armstrong. His theory was that there was an Oswald project, and it involved 2 guys, one from Russia, one from Texas, who were kind of lookalikes, look enough to fool people. And they were used for whatever they were just incorporated into intelligence, kind of an X-Files type of thing from the time they were children. I don't know if I believe that, but if you look at the pictures of Lee Harvey Oswald, there's a lot of differences between the late great Jack White, who didn't get enough credit as he should have. He put out a big video presentation called "The Many Faces of Lee Harvey Oswald." If you look at that, you'll see sometimes he looks like he has a big bull neck, and other times he looks like the guy. In this theory, the person that we know as the patsy would have been the Russian-born Oswald, kind of thinner, and didn't the other one kind of looked tougher. Supposedly had that reputation again. But so there's so much that can, and that's why you can get involved in the minutia of the JFK assassination, and you can, like my co-author Wayne Laws spent a lot of time on the medical evidence, which you get involved in that. You can study the Secret Service. There's so many elements that you can go down, but we wanted to concentrate in this on to try to differentiate between what we think is the ground level conspiracy, and I think that's taken a lot of attention away from researchers.
Yeah,
where they act like this is these people were all being manipulated themselves. Yes, Jack Ruby went back to as a gun runner for Al Capone as a youth. He had lots of dubious connections. Obviously, he was some kind of mobster, but he obviously was. I mean, what? How could they have compelled him to shoot Oswald? How do you do that? So I think those are the questions that need to be looked at. These are obviously powerful players, because that group, anti-Castro Cubans and rogue elements of the CIA, mafia people, they couldn't get the media 60 years later to still be, defending the single bullet theory, and having people like Stephen King write ridiculous, books about it and saying Oswald did it and calling Oswald a little shit and all this stuff. I went over that in history, what I think of that guy, but there are lots of people like that, actors. And so that's what made Oliver Stone so different, is that he really was the only one in Hollywood came out and took the different tack that said, hey, this is, although I will say I don't like anything else about him, but Rob Reiner, of all people, the meathead, has been producing a series now about Oswald, and he apparently, is pretty good on it. I haven't watched the whole thing from what I've heard. That's kind of shocking knowing the rest of his politics, but give credit where credit's due.
Oh yeah, I know, and I'm glad you brought this up right now in this interview, as far as motives, because motive is where it is like the biggest fork in the road for most people who sit down and talk about the Kennedy assassination, because of course, like I said before, they eliminate one guy, but really we have been made to live with the world that came after that death, and the motives, they're a dime a dozen. People say that it's self-preservation move by a national security state still in its infancy, and that Jack Kennedy was talking about smashing the CIA into 1,000 little pieces. There are theories about him wanting to bring us back to sound money. There is aversion to war, like you were talking about, Cuba, Vietnam, the expansion of what it says essentially Operation Gladio. And then, of course, Don, it even goes into UFO territory. There was going to be UFO disclosure. It was a little bit of like I don't know, because he's just right after Eisenhower. But that's the whole thing, anything. But and I see that there's a little bit of overlap in some of that. Maybe a few of them could be sure, meritorious, but it seems a lot more plausible than what we have about lone wolves and magic bullets. Oh. So where are you with this? As a researcher and as somebody who is analyzing other people's work, and also doing a lot of firsthand, interviews yourself. What do you think it is? A combination of things, and what does your gut tell you?
Well, I think Oliver Stone got it generally right when he said there was something in the air, and I think you had people, and again, I can't prove any of this, but I think that if you look in the Pentagon, I don't know anybody like him in the Pentagon. At the top, General Curtis LeMay, the guy they based Dr. Strangelove on, certainly hated him, and he had a lot of power. Allen Dulles in the CIA had to hate him because he fired him after the Bay of Pigs. He humiliated him, and we know he hated him. Just like Stephen King, I think he called him that little shit that Stephen King mimicked Allen Dulles, I guess, decades later. But you had people like that, and you had whoever killed him had to have, and you had McGeorge Bundy in the White House as National Security Advisor. I've talked about this before. McGeorge Bundy drafted National Security Action Memorandum 273 the day before the assassination. If JFK had ever read that, he would have fired him on the spot. No question, because JFK had just signed National Security Action Memorandum 263, which Oliver Stone talks a lot in this film, which delineated the withdrawal process for Vietnam. And he talked about the first 1,000 troops out by the end of the year and all troops out by 1965. So this was a huge shift. And obviously the Pentagon, which already hated him because of the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and its June 1963 speech at American University, which I think is the greatest speech ever, the American president, where he looked at our enemies in mortal terms. He said about the Soviets at the time, hey, they love their children. They breathe the same air. Nobody had ever done that before. We always try to demonize our enemies, and we still do that. So it stood out like in stark contrast to anything any other politician had said on the subject. So they actually despised him. But George Bundy had to know that the memorandum he signed the day before the assassination completely contradicted JFK's recent withdrawal efforts, and of course led the way to escalation. And of course, Lyndon Johnson was only too happy to sign it. So I think you have to consider him a conspirator, because why else would nobody would have written that knowing his boss would fire him. He certainly wouldn't approve of it. And then I think you have to look at the Secret Service. Someone in the Secret Service got those guys to stand down.
Yep.
They didn't do their job, and that's why unlike most critics, that's the first. I believe if there had been a real investigation, that's the first people you would have grilled. You would have grilled driver William Greer, and you would have said, what does your training tell you when you hear gunfire that you slow down or stop the car and turn around and watch the target's head get blown off, which is what he did. Now, aren't you trained to accelerate out of danger? He didn't do that. And Roy Kellerman was sitting in the front seat next to Greer. He was supposed to jump over the seats and camouflage JFK, which is what Rufus Youngblood did a few cars back with LBJ. He did his job. And of course, the agents on the backup car, which was, less than 10 feet or so to the limousine, they could have sprinted there in a couple of seconds, and they had 6 seconds to react. They did nothing until Clint Hill ran belatedly after the final headshot. So that if I'm conducting the investigation, those are the first witnesses I call and say, what happened? And of course, we know that all of them were out, most all of them were out drinking till 4 or 5 in the morning the night before in violation of Secret Service protocol. So that's where you would have began a real investigation. But of course, this wasn't a real investigation. So I think you have to look at who the mafia couldn't control, the anti-Castro Cubans couldn't control the Secret Service. So I think this was a conspiracy hatched at the highest level.
Yes.
And if there, again, we talk about the Illuminati, whoever you want to say is in charge of it. I mean, Illuminati, I think, is a kind of a cover. I mean, people could say the Jews, the Freemasons, everybody has their suspects they think run everything. But I prefer kind of an all-encompassing term like the Illuminati, that, people that are at the top, people that you don't see, that are, people don't even know their names. And I would suspect that's who gives the approval for these things. And maybe they, maybe attached to the Pentagon, to the CIA, farmed out. I don't know the details, but all I know is that they went to a lot of trouble to accomplish it, and even more trouble to lie about it. And we know William certainly knows better than that. The happened with the medical evidence and everything. So you ended up with body alteration theories and all this stuff because the evidence is that crazy.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm going to ask you about that too in a second. But since you got there, you're talking about real investigations, and even if you did conduct the investigations, who's going to listen? Because there's obvious media recruitment, Operation Mockingbird, and this is the event that gave birth to that official term, conspiracy theorist. So can you talk a little bit about state-sponsored obfuscation of the truth? Because among all of that, we know that the CIA not only was planting that seed of consciousness of conspiracy theorists as people you should stay away from because they're just dangerous thinkers, right, but we know that there is a lot of actual planting of theories into the public that are easily like you were saying with LBJ. Here's a quote actually from Francis Richard Connolly, who said, "The notion that LBJ was the criminal mastermind behind the Kennedy assassination is simply another disinformation falsehood dreamed up by the CIA. He was most definitely involved in the plot and offered up his personal hitman, Malcolm Wallace, to be part of it. But the men who masterminded the plot were, he says, Alan Dulles and David Atlee Phillips, with George Bush being the most important figure in actually executing the plan." So, but again, there's a lot of people like, oh, it was LBJ. He wanted to be president. Does LBJ really have that kind of swing? That's what I always ask.
No, and again, I think that, and LBJ, certainly, I have strong opinions about him, and he was the first figure that was 7 years old when he was killed, and I heard my father said Johnson did it, so I absorbed all of it, everybody in my family. So it was so obvious the way he acted, but clearly he knew about it ahead of time, and he approved and was only too happy. Richard Nixon later had a great comment where he talked about LBJ, said, "I wanted to be president too, but I wasn't willing to kill to do it," or something like that. But I mean, I don't think Johnson. I think he would have, but if he could have, but he had to have somebody more power. LBJ, whatever his legacy was, again, 60 years later, you're not going to have people in Hollywood, everybody covering up because of LBJ. That's just silly. So these are forces again that I think are above it all. We don't even understand that run everything. And but I think LBJ certainly knew, and there's a lot of good people that think he was the primary mover, but I don't think presidents have that kind of power. I mean, maybe later on when you talk about the Clinton body count and everything, certainly some of those people in Arkansas and stuff, they probably have autonomy to do that on their own, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think that in this case, when you're talking about controlling the Secret Service, controlling Bethesda Naval Hospital, all the powerful doctors there, and controlling the FBI, CIA, everything, and the media. Most importantly, the media. I just don't think that LBJ had that kind of power. And certainly, although he hated Bobby Kennedy too, I'll have in my upcoming book, the American Memory Hall, which will be on a few more. I'll have another one out there. So I get
nice.
I'll have a lot more in JFK, but I'll just give you a teaser. There's one scene which I didn't know about where LBJ was supposed to, when Bobby Kennedy was shot, June 5th, 1968, he lingered for many hours. And supposedly LBJ stayed up all night in the White House, pacing back and forth and calling people and saying, "Is he dead yet?" So I think that, that tells you something about the character of the guy. But these things are all connected. So I don't think LBJ wasn't around, for instance, to orchestrate the assassination of JFK Jr., which I believe was an assassination. And again, I think that these things are all connected, and that's why JFK is so important. Because if JFK hadn't been assassinated, RFK never would have been. I don't think there would have been Chappaquiddick. I think it was Teddy Kennedy's political assassination, and JFK Jr. wouldn't have been assassinated. So I think these things are tied together, and that's just one. I guess one with the octopus, where Danny Castellano talking about the octopus. That's just one pinnacle of the octopus, is the Kennedy thing that has all these connections, and that's the way you can look at a lot of these issues where they have connections. It's like a domino theory. So if you can show the truth about one of them, dominoes start to fall, and that's why they fiercely stop you from saying the truth about any of these things.
Yes. Yeah, and so I would say it's somebody like you who has done so much work into pining through Jim Garrison's work and all that. He was not the type to really get around to naming individuals. He's just more so, his work stands to prove that whoever was the head honcho or the top counsel of it all, there was a very, very concerted group of there was organizational efforts to make sure that this went down and that it was covered up. Because, of course, like you said before, the investigations are they're not legitimate by any standard. And but he never went as far as saying George Bush or Alan Dulles are talking about individuals.
No, and Garrison was busy trying to stave off the greatest media attack that anyone had ever seen before. But he did. I won't give the spoiler, but in the book he did tell John Barber who he thought the man behind it all was. I'll tease that. It's in the book.
Okay.
Kind of a surprising name. People recognize it, but and I don't know that I agree with it. But again, Garrison did lots of work on it, and his interest was trying to. And I think although he did say lots of things, and they're always interesting, but in my case, all I can do is talk about what I did. And I think William feels the same way I do. Is I don't theorize at all, and there's no theory in my books. And other than this, I think it can be shown that what we talk about here is the ground level conspiracy that's separate from what I think was the real conspiracy to kill JFK. Because what's interesting about that group of players in New Orleans is that all of them would have participated. And there's accounts of David Ferry saying we got to kill him, and Bannister and so forth, and all these people, Clay Shaw. I think all of them would have willingly participated in a plot to kill Kennedy if they could. They weren't powerful enough. No one was going to trust them to do that. But the only person in that New Orleans group that wouldn't have participated was Lee Harvey Oswald. He's the only one that had a favorable opinion of JFK. There's nothing on the record to indicate that he opposed JFK in anything, whereas the others despised him.
Okay, so then here's one. Now, I would love to hold you over to the on the other side of the intermission. Would you stay with me for a little longer?
Sure.
Okay, so then before we get there, because we have about 6 minutes until we get to intermission, I want to throw a theory in your lap, because you were talking about body alteration theories, which is something that I talked to John Barber about one of the last times he was on, and he never really touched that, and I didn't expect him to. I just wanted to see what he thought about it. But you bring up fairly early in the book Officer J.D. Tippet, and the official story of Tippet is that Oswald was initially arrested for killing Tippet and then charged for killing Kennedy later on. But for other people, Tippet is the subject of a pretty compelling, if you're to ask me, body switch theory, because the theory that he was killed for his resemblance to Jack Kennedy, and his body was then used to present body wounds that would actually support the official story of a single bullet. Obviously, you know about this. What are your thoughts on it? I'll put a picture of Tippet up while you speak.
Well, these kind of theories are really, and then I have a lot of people, and they support me on Substack. They're really very big supporters of mine that think Jackie Kennedy killed Kennedy. Now that's become a new popular theory. And before it was Bill Greer, the driver. And so, Tippet, I guess I can see some resemblance to JFK. I just, again, I don't theorize, and I don't discount anything, like I said, because the official story is impossible. So, however, whether it's the Tippet thing, whether it's George, I have a guy that interviewed on my show that thinks George H.W. Bush was a gunman in the Dallas Records building. So, all of that I don't think is very likely, but I think they would probably get people that are less, have less notoriety. But I think all of them are none of them are as unlikely as Lee Harvey Oswald killing Kennedy. That's what I look at. I don't think the official story is impossible. So anything that works around that and tries to find the answers, I think is a good thing. I don't scoff at any theories. I don't buy those at all because I don't know, that I have a theory. Other than I said, I think that this was a conspiracy involved. However it played out, it involved the greatest powers in the government and maybe private industry at that time. These are the most powerful forces on the planet, I think, that took to.
I think you're right there. And for people who seek out these conversations, these books, and they want to read and they want to study and they want to speculate as well, their particular understanding of the situation becomes very personal for them. I had somebody stop talking to me because I did not believe that the driver killed Kennedy.
Yeah,
that it wasn't the driver himself. I said, listen, and like you said, does it actually even matter at this point? To the point, The point is they said that a single bullet coming from behind Kennedy killed him, when we know just from the Zapruder film, he grabbed his throat first and then his head blew back and to the left. It's just we have at least 2 shots on camera that are coming from the front of him. That's all you need to know. Everything else is just we're going to squabble over this. They're lying to us. That's right. So it's a great point there. All right. So ladies and gentlemen, we got plenty more to do because I definitely want to throw a John question in there to Donald Jeffries. Donald, I'm going to mute you temporarily, and we'll bring you back in just a little bit. It's only going to be about 2 minutes or so. Ladies and gents, you know what to do. Please follow us over to pilled.net. The link is below, or quite frankly.tv, all powered by Foxhole and Pilled all the time over there. No paywall, no nothing. And we get more time with Donald Jeffries. So please hop on over. It's been a great night so far, and plenty more coming up after this.
The rest of the show is available exclusively at pilled.net. Follow the link in the description of the episode, get signed up, it's that easy. Or head on over to quitefrankly.tv, just press play. No paywalls, no censorship, no strings attached. So head on over, quitefrankly.tv, powered by Foxhole, and pilled.net.
It's intermission time, folks. Time out to press the like button. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Welcome to intermission.
We'll be right back.
Yeah, intermission. Yeah, intermission.
We're now entering, quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.
Quite frankly.